earnest as we have the lead up for the big draft party down in Dallas, Texas next week. The Ravens on the clock with the 16th pick. Plenty of conjecture around here. We are going to be talking a ton of NFL draft over the next 10 days. But before we do that, the NFL schedule will be coming out later on this week. Luke Jones will have that ready for you on the WNST Tech Services, all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday. Luke, it's these are the two really, really active weeks of the offseason, right? Like, this is where it gets a little crazy, and you get to figure out when you get to go to Kansas City and when we're going to get to go out and see the Chargers play in L.A. in a soccer stadium, and our bus trip to Charlotte and our plane trip down to Atlanta and all the things we're doing here this spring and summer and fall, right?
Yeah, this is the week of the off season where you start to really get context, and we got some of that with free agency. There's no question about that. I mean, that's the first major highlight, and then you get to the schedule release. You get to the NFL draft the following week. We don't know exactly when the schedule is going to be released, but based on the last few years, they've done it the week before the NFL draft, so we're on alert for that. And I know Peter King in the Monday Morning Quarterback indicated maybe Thursday, but certainly we'll get that out to you via the WNST.net tech service. But you're ready for it. We've talked about the opponents. We know where they're going to play. We know who they're hosting here in Baltimore. But you find out what the tough part of your schedule is, what your bye week is, how the month of December looks, and that really can be quite pivotal. I think you look at last year with the way the Ravens started out, and then you saw what they've dealt with the bye week, post-bye week, and the teams they played down the stretch, that really allowed them to put themselves in position to be in the playoff hunt at the end of the season. On the flip side, go back to 2016, and they were in pretty decent shape going into the month of December, and then you remember that they had to go play at New England, and they had to play at Pittsburgh, and they had to play at Cincinnati, and we know how that turned out. So you're always looking for context, and we've spent so much time talking in hypotheticals about the schedule, about the draft, about all different types of projecting what's going to happen in 2018. And once the schedule comes out, and then once the draft takes place next weekend, you really start to get a better grasp on what the season's going to look like, and more importantly, what your roster is going to look like for 2018.
All right, well, obviously the Dallas Cowboys with a very, very, I don't want to say shocking, but I don't know that, on the outside we saw this coming and said, well, just hang in there if you need a wide receiver. Des Bryant will be available. And, these pieces of news and these Jeremy Maclins that happened last year and these sort of late releases, somebody's going to retire before the season begins that we don't see in our mind's eye right now. Weird things are going to happen, but the Cowboys getting rid of their franchise wide receiver in the beginning of April is a little strange, I would say.
Yeah, and I think you could even say, well, why'd you make this decision now? I mean, it's not as though, and I know they added Allen Hurns, but it's not as though they have a great wide receiver group right now. So, you can always talk about, well, why did you wait till April? Why did you wait till June? You always talk about, we always want to hear players talk about having loyalty to their teams, where this is a great example of a team not having much loyalty to a player, not just cutting them, but waiting until more than a month into free agency. But I think Des Bryant is going to be really interesting as far as where he ends up. Clearly, Ravens fans were going to start linking the Ravens to him, and I don't think it's an impossibility. I think there are reasons. I mean, this team still needs a wide receiver. I think this team could still add 2 wide receivers, but there's a reason why the Dallas Cowboys just threw Des Bryant off the ship. One, yes, he was expensive, but take a look at his numbers the last 3 years. This isn't a guy that's an all-pro wide receiver anymore. And do I think he has some good football left in the right situation with the right attitude and with the right adjustments to how he plays? Sure. I don't think the guy's completely done. At the same time, any team, whether you're the Ravens, whether you're Washington, go down the list of any team that might have any reason to be interested in a player like Des Bryant, and acknowledging there's been baggage. This is a guy who's been late to meetings and has had times where he's been a malcontent. Understanding all that, this is a guy that there's a reason why he hasn't been the same player, and he's had injuries to his ankle, to his foot, to his knee. He wasn't the fastest player in the world to begin with. So I think you have to really understand what you're getting. You need to peel back the layers of just saying, well, Des Bryant, former Pro Bowl wide receiver, big name, explosive player, big-time playmaker, and acknowledge what he is in 2018. If you can do that, and then what the product is at this point, at this stage of his career, then I think there's a potential for there to be a fit, whether it's the Ravens or whatever team signs him. And I know he's already talked about wanting to play Dallas twice a year, or at least playing them once a year. But I think at the same time, bringing it back to the Ravens specifically, I think you look at Des Bryant and you peel back the layers of what he used to be and look at what he is now, and I think you see a guy that's quite similar to Michael Crabtree, to be totally honest with you. Maybe a little more big play capability, maybe a ceiling that's a little bit lower, which is certainly a little more of a factor with some of the attitude issues he's had. Even though Crabtree's had some, he doesn't have a completely spotless record in that department. But I think for a team like the Ravens, where they run a lot of 2 tight end sets, they don't run as many 3 wide receiver sets. If you're talking about Des Bryant and Michael Crabtree as your starting wide receivers, I don't know. That feels a little 2010 to me. And when I say that, I'm talking about when the Ravens added Anquan Bolden, and they had Derek Mason, and then they added T.J. Houshmandzadeh. 3 guys who had all been 1,000-yard receivers in their career. And on paper, that sounds great, right? It sounds like a really talented wide receiver core. What was the problem? They all did very similar things, and none of them could stretch the field. And I think if you look at a starting combination of Michael Crabtree and Des Bryant, on top of not having a playmaking tight end that can get open down the seam and bust up double 2 or cover 2 kind of coverage, and you're replacing 2 starters on your offensive line, so pass protection could be an issue. I don't think this is the best fit. I'm not saying I'm completely opposed to Des Bryant, but one, the money has to be right. The Ravens have a little over $10 million in cap space, but they need money to sign their draft picks. They need money for their rainy day fund. So I think they can make it work in that regard, but it's not as though they have unlimited funds in that department. And 2, from a football standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, I'm not sure the best fit is having 2 slower wide receivers as your starters and maybe having some issues with getting some younger receivers on the field in a lot of instances. So I'm not completely opposed to it because I do think they need a lot of work at the wide receiver spot still, but I still want to see this team look to the draft to try to add 1 or 2 options that give them some help in the short term, but more importantly, gives them some encouraging upside for the future because, I don't look at this team as necessarily being a Super Bowl contender in 2018. I'd like to see them get back to the playoffs. I think that's a reasonable expectation, and I think Steve Bisciotti's expecting that, but I don't know. I just look at Des Bryant, and I see a receiver that's very similar to Michael Crabtree, and as much as we talk about number 1 wide receivers and number 2 wide receivers and number 3 guys, what you really want is diversity and skill set of your wide receivers. You want a guy that can line up in the slot. You want a speed guy. In a perfect world, you love to have that number 1 who can do everything. The Ravens don't have that. But, they have that possession guy, that red zone guy in Michael Crabtree. And I'm not saying you can't make it work with him and Des Bryant, but you do have 2 guys who have been known to have quite a bit of an ego, and like many top-flight type wide receivers, but you also have 2 guys that aren't very fast and 2 guys who it'd be tough to really point to and say, yeah, either of those guys is a number 1 wide receiver right now. I'm not sure how great that's going to work in the real world and not just looking at things on paper and not just getting excited about another name. So
I think there's a point, though, for us as fans, the getting excited about any name. When you don't have wide receivers, any wide receivers. Raymond Berry sounds like a good addition at this point. You know what I mean? Like, bringing back Anquan Bolden is something this crowd talks about around here. Roger Carr, for crying out loud. I don't know. But there's a reason he's out on the street. He's a malcontent. At one point, slugged his mom. I mean, you're talking about crazy stuff that guy's, had going on. And now, his best days are behind him. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's not going to go out and catch 90 balls this year, right?
Right. And that, again, he's 29. I think in the right fit with the right people around him, the right quarterback, and I don't know if Joe Flacco's that guy or not at this point, the right coaching staff, maybe a couple guys who know him off the field a little bit, guys that he has a relationship with, and Dez Bryant's got to look in the mirror himself and say, you know what? I've never been the most polished wide receiver in the world. I've always been able to get by with my talent. And this is a guy who's a supremely talented wide receiver, or at least was before some of the injuries caught up to him. But he needs to acknowledge that, and he needs to attack that and look that in the mirror. If he handles that part of it and then he's in the right fit, I think Dez Bryant can play another 2 or 3 years at a pretty high level. Not an all-pro level, but can still be a productive receiver. But, again, to your point, the Dallas Cowboys, who were invested in this guy, I mean, they've paid him a lot of money.
Put up with him?
Put up with a lot. And like I said, it's not as though they brought Allen Robinson in. They brought Allen Hurns in. So, it's not as though they have a wide receiver group that looks all that impressive right now. That's not to justify paying him what he was scheduled to make in 2018. But at the same time, that shows that there was some eagerness to get rid of him because they don't exactly have a great group left behind without him. Now, they're going to be looking to draft, and they're kind of in the same boat as the Ravens are right now. That Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, Cortland Sutton, those types of receivers, whether late first, early second, wherever they might fall, they're going to be looking at them. But I think, and the Ravens fans aren't unique to this, and Ravens fans have as much right as any fan base in the league to be unsettled about wide receiver because this organization has a really lousy track record in that department. Despite all the other good things they've done and all the games they've won otherwise. But at the same time, if you're going to bring Dez Bryant in, and I'm not 100% against it, I want to make it very clear about that. I think he can still play.
At a price.
But it's got to be at a right price, and it has to be with the right understanding. And I think it has to be with the right planning in mind. The worst thing that could happen in my mind would be to bring in Dez Bryant and then the Ravens decide they're not going to invest draft capital at the wide receiver position. I think that would be a mistake. I think you still need to be looking younger. You need to be looking more long-term at this position because even if Crabtree has a good season and even if John Brown pops and becomes the guy he was 3 years ago, he's only on a one-year deal, so you could be right back in the same position needing a speed guy next offseason. So I'm okay with it, with the caveat that you have to acknowledge what he is at this point. There has to be a very firm price. And again, this team doesn't have a ton of cap space left. Yes, they can create some more space. Yes, you can work out an extension with C.J. Mosley, and you could restructure a deal or two. But at the same time, if you're going to ask me, would I prefer another veteran wide receiver at this point, or would I prefer a veteran offensive tackle or a veteran center, whatever that might be? And I don't know who that name is right now. And quite frankly, there'll be some more names, Austin Howard-type guys that hit the market after the draft and in June and even during training camp. If you're asking me a veteran lineman versus a veteran tight end or a veteran wide receiver, I'd probably have receiver third on that in that hierarchy at this point. So I'm not as gung-ho about the Dez Bryant possibility as a lot of people, but I get it. He's a name. He's still a guy that I think in the right system, the right situation can be productive, but I don't think he's someone that you want to just go out there and be the highest bidder because I think there's very much a chance that Dez Bryant goes somewhere and it's not going to work out all that well if it's not the right situation and he doesn't have his head in a good place going into that situation and isn't just all about trying to exact revenge on the Dallas Cowboys.
All of our WNST coverage here and our Luke Jones reports brought to you by the Baltimore Brigade. The Washington Valor went down last Friday night. They come back on the 28th. That's next Saturday against the Albany Empire. You can learn more about the Brigade at BaltimoreBrigade.com as well as at Monumental Sports. Don't forget the Modell Lyric is now our partner here at WNST.net. We're excited about that. You're going to hear from Damian Darlington, who's the band leader from Brit Floyd. They are a Pink Floyd tribute band. They do their thing next Thursday night. So when the draft is going on, if you love Pink Floyd, the music of Pink Floyd, the Pink Floyd experience, you'll see that down at the Modell Lyric with Brit Floyd next Thursday, the 26th. Don't forget Jackson Brown also on May 3rd. Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to being the best at everything they do. They are sponsoring our Thursday Community and Charity Series, the Be More Positive Community and Charity Series. A relentless commitment to being the best at everything they do, and branches now everywhere. Everybody at Howard Bank empowered to help you when you're in there. Go see them. I know for some of you it's a little new. For some of you down in Howard County and other places in the business community, you're familiar with Howard Bank, but they are expanding, and we're excited to be a part of that, even wearing the hat here today. Cole Roofing, also our sponsor of our Be More Positive Thursday Community and Charity Series. We all felt that March wind blowing in. Then we had the rains. Then we had the crazy weekend. Now we got the heat back coming soon. If you have a corporate or commercial roofing space, you want to let professionals up there to give it a look. Make sure things survive the winter okay. You need Cole Roofing and Pfister Energy. Billy Cole will join us later on in the week. I'm sure we'll be talking more about the draft and about the schedule and about all of that other stuff here at WNST.net. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault, also there 24 hours a day for anything you missed this week. You can find us anytime, anywhere by downloading the TuneIn radio app. It's the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Luke Jones is our guest and our partner here for all things Orioles as they're in Detroit and then home against the Indians this week. We're awaiting the NFL schedule, and we're also awaiting the NFL draft. And obviously this week we're going to see some faces. The Ravens putting some players in front of us, some Brandon Williams and some Joe Flacco's and some Weddles and some leaders open for business this week. So, all of that's shut down and we can't talk to our coaches. All disappears finally. The guys making $25 million a year can report to work.
Right. I mean, this is the week where, the official preparation for the 2018 season begins from a player versus coach standpoint. These guys have some contact with John Harbaugh and their position coaches, but it's very, very casual. It's much more, how's your family doing? It's much more, I assume, they speak in a lot of hypotheticals like you see with the tampering at the combine between agents and executives. It's much more a case of, if we were talking about football right now.
Well, we really didn't talk. We just texted.
Right. If we were talking right now, how would you feel about running this kind of a system or this kind of a package from a personnel standpoint, whatever. But now you get into the point where you enter phase one of the off-season program, and to be clear, there are still rules in place to kind of govern